This recording is from the NGO office, New York, where the Institute of the Blessed Virgin Mary Loreto and the Congregation of Jesus, CJ, are working together with the United Nations and with the great hope of creating a more humane, just and sustainable world. And I'm Cecilia O'Dwyer, and with me in the office are Cynthia, whom you'll see up there on the right-hand side, and below her, Janet, and over on the left, Janet's from Australia, Cynthia's from India, and up on the left-hand corner, we've got Francesca, who's from Australia as well, and is our youth representative. And they can say a little bit more about themselves when they begin to speak and ask questions. And I'm very happy to have with us from Toronto, Canada, Angela Orellana. And Angela is there you'll see her down on the left-hand side. You can give it, yes, and we're having this recording because Angela recently attended the COP25 meeting held in Madrid. And we were very happy that she was able to go and represent us there. But now, just a little bit about COP meetings and that. COP is really a conference. It's called Conference of Parties. That means of countries. And these countries work together with the United Nations and within what's called the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And it's the acronym UNFCCC. Right, so this is the 25th session of these meetings, and they are formal meetings held, and they actually began way back in the 1990s to prepare for the Kyoto Protocol, and that was the kind of, I think, the first maybe big meeting that we began to hear more about climate change and about countries, and at that time it was only the developing countries trying to bring themselves together to some legally binding form of reducing emissions. Now, they weren't very successful, and they kept on, and they've had these meetings yearly, and the last kind of really important one that we heard about was the Paris Climate Agreement, and that was broadly publicized, and there's a lot of hope around it. And then since then, it has been the struggle of seeing, if the countries will actually move forward and how they move forward and all the rest of it. Yeah. So now we are at COP 25 at this point. So now, before handing over to Angela, I would like to thank the Medical Missionary Sisters because of them, they took Angela on board for the COP25 meeting. And then why is that? She was able to get accreditation through the Medical Mission Sisters because the accreditation for the whole climate process is different from the accreditation for ECOSOC. It's a separate accreditation. And if you're with ECOSOC, it doesn't mean that you can go to the climate process. So just so that you're aware of that, and you never know for future, it might be of interest to us. So once again, thanks to the Medical Mission Sisters and to Saline Paramunda especially, who really worked hard to get Angela in there. Well, let's begin now. Thank you, Angela, for coming on for this conversation. And to begin with, would you tell us a little about yourself and why you were interested in attending COP25?
Well, I have been involved with the environmental movement since for about the last 20 years. I attended university in the environmental studies program, but I worked with the Archdiocese of Toronto, and I am a Loreto associate. So when I understood that the Loreto sisters are very much involved and interested about the Sustainable Development Goals, I thought that this would be an opportunity to learn more. I've been following the COP process for since it began 25 years ago, and just didn't seem as though I'd ever have an opportunity to go. But it was. I'm very thankful that the Loreto sisters were able to put my name forward, and the medical missionary sisters were able to to nominate me to go, and I'm very thankful for that. It was a very rewarding and inspiring experience to go to COP25. The purpose of COP25, I know we're coming up to the implementation, the period, 5-year period before 2020 was a preparatory period from between Paris Agreement and the actual implementation of the Paris Agreement. And it really had more to do with process. It was to settle the rules of how they would implement the Paris Agreement. So there were a number of outstanding issues that hadn't been resolved in Poland. A lot of them had to do with Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. And it's very important because these have to do, Article 6 has to do with accounting of greenhouse gas emissions and each country's commitment as to how they were going to reduce emissions. So that it was to sort of establish the rules so that there'd be no double counting and this type of thing. So I think that the result, whether we can say that COP25 was successful or not, what I hear very much is that no, they didn't get done what they wanted to get done. But there were reasons that some of the things could not be resolved. And I have faith that they will be. I mean, they did finish the COP25 with an understanding that all countries would increase their ambition. They did not make commitments as to how much. Some countries did actually report that they were, such as the European Union, I think they said that they were going to reduce their emissions by 45% by 2030. Some countries did come forward and state what they were ready to commit to, but others didn't, especially the large emitters. The other thing that was very evident was that the high emitters, the countries such as India, Australia, and USA, they were not ready to make any firm commitment. At least not to state how much they are, but it is expected that their national determined contributions, they're called NDCs, are due the first quarter of next year. So all countries are expected to go back and prepare their commitments and submit them. One thing that's new at COP25 was that it was recognized that not only the developed countries, but also the LDCs, is it low development?
Yeah, least developed.
Least developed countries were making their commitments as well. So overall, I think there was great hope that people, because I think that this year has seen so much involvement by civil society on this issue. There have been more strikes, and there was great hope that those commitments would come through. But unfortunately, they didn't. They are still on the table. But I'll tell you why I am hopeful. As an observer, I attended I did attend a few sessions where the negotiations were going on, where delegates were in attendance, and you were able to do that if there was room available for you, or if there was you were not shut out because it was too full. But most of my time was spent going to a lot of the workshops and a lot of the side events. And that's where I think I had the most hope, hearing what is happening on the ground and how they are, people that when they're forced into a position where, the resiliency that and adaptation methods that they have. I think my biggest criticism with COP25 is that group or the civil society really needed to be informing the people that were inside. There was two different groups of people. There were the negotiators inside, and then there were the people that were living the impacts of climate change and adapting and trying to be resilient. So these parties need to talk to each other. I think in one case, in Canada, we have a new environment minister, and I think that he did receive some information and was briefed prior to, some of the issues were then when they got stuck very early, because there were a number, I think more people involved this year, I think 8,000 people as opposed to 6,500 at the last one. So the more people that are involved, the harder it is to get consensus on things. So a lot of the issues that were not decided, they were left until the ministers arrived. And these ministers are coming in cold, in a lot of cases. Well, not totally cold, but as to what has happened the prior week. And if they're informed, I think it really did. It was noticeable that on some of the issues, they did take into account, what the advice of the civil society that had been in attendance there. So I think that there has to be more dialogue, going on between civil society and, the people that make the decisions. So I think that what I also noticed is that because up to this point, a lot of those people had been shut out, and there wasn't actually one occasion during the time that I had already left, but when the ministers did arrive, they were totally shut out. I think that once I think the issue was on Article 6 and including human rights. One of the things that they wanted to do in Article 6 was to include human rights and Indigenous people's rights as well. And that I think that once that issue came up, then there were countries that refused to have to accept those as part of the text. It caused, a great reaction, and rightfully so. And in order to get control of the situation, there was the security actually forced the people out and right out of the venue, which was really, really sad. But anyway, that was just one incident that I have to say that was really disappointing, but underscored the disconnect is there between the people that are making the decisions and the people that are experiencing the impacts and have so much to contribute. And I was very honored and privileged to be able to hear some of their ideas. Yes. And what,
So I think...
And I see there, like besides the mitigation, that has to happen. Oh, I have something saying the internet connection is unstable. Okay, then, so some of the, like as I say, that there's an understanding that a problem with the fossil fuels and resource extraction is that they have to stay in the ground. There's no point on working on mitigation if you have fossil fuel infrastructure going on. You're working at cross purposes. So, but the people that are the negotiators, they realize that that's going to be a severe problem when they try to solve that problem, because a lot of people that are countries that are resource based. One of the new things that was introduced this year was the idea of a just transition. That if you need, in order for us to be successful in any of the things that we try to do to reduce greenhouse emissions, we must take into account the social aspect of it. This is what has been missing, and this is what has caused such a great reaction, is to be able to to make sure that they have a just transition that will allow people that are working in those sectors to be able to be retrained, or
Yeah.
there will be. And there's also some other things that have to be considered. For instance, developing countries that have not had the advantage, or they're still at a stage of development that's still based or dependent upon resources extraction, and they have to be permitted a little bit of time to do that while they transition away as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so thank
uh,
you. Yeah, thank you. I'll just come in for a minute there and ask some of our office staff here if you've got questions for Angela. So who'd like to pipe up there first of all? Because I know you have questions. So let's go for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would like to thank
Sylvia.
you, Angela, for sharing. I just want to ask you, how did you feel the participation of the youth? Do you think that they were listened to?
yes, I think there were a few opportunities for the youth. There were a lot of side events. I know that they were involved in some of the the larger events where the negotiation were going on. There's opportunities for questions and answers, but they are very, very committed. And I have to say that one of the most inspiring and humbling presentations that I attended, one was with Greta was supposed to have arrived, and I think she was still in Portugal. So, but I did attend that session anyway, and spoke with a number of youth from different different countries who, for great sacrifice it took them to be able to find the means to participate in COP, and they spoke to us in languages which were not their first language, and they were talking to adults who normally would be telling them what to do, and they were telling the adults what they need to do. And they are very, very committed. They are holding the adults to account because it is their future. They have a lot of wonderful ideas. They need funding and they need support. And another group that was involved with education said that this is going to be a major thing in the future, that some countries have already begun to include environmental education in the curriculum.
Yeah, Italy, yes.
Yes, and this is going to be very, very fruitful, I feel, in the future. The youth are impatient, and rightfully so, and they're angry, but they are committed and they're dedicated, and if they want to hold our generation, or the people that are governing to account, and they're not going to let them off the hook. And so I think that we'll see more. If they don't, if success isn't, if they're not successful in reducing emissions, I think you'll see more and more youth in actually just taking over the reins of power to try to affect change themselves. That's what I see happening.
Thank you. Yes. And another question there?
Angela, yesterday I attended a wonderful meeting on the effects of the climate crisis on women. And I was wondering, in a similar capacity, can you tell us a bit about the proportion of the women in decision-making roles and negotiating roles, and just whether the discussion looked at the disproportionate impact of climate change on women at all?
Yes. As far as negotiations, I felt that they were pretty well represented in negotiations. There were very many women holding very responsible positions and actually affecting change. I feel that in some of the least developed countries, women are really the drivers of change and adaptation when it comes to dealing with the impacts of climate change. They are, concerned about their families and their And some of the most inspiring situations, you know, I remember there was one situation where a woman was constantly her chicken farm was being flooded all the time. So she, after this happened often enough, she decided that she would go into, she would now get a duck farm. So that it was just, you know, like an example of, okay, I'm faced with this situation. I'm going to adapt and become resilient. And this is what we see. And we see they're building walls to stop the sea level from coming, the water from coming in. And they're implementing projects to stop salination of the water from the seawater. So they are very ingenious in finding solutions. And, fortunately they are, they're very much a presence there. I can't say that, there's a lot of gender equity, as far as I could see, and I felt they were very well represented.
But other questions?
Angela, thank you so much for your sharing. We attended a COP25 briefing to the ECOSOC members, and although they did mention, as you said, about the disappointment with the national countries, particularly the high emitters, they mentioned that a lot of businesses actually took it on and were committing to doing something about it, or have actually already started. You mentioned you went to side events. I was just wondering whether you attended any of the side events of, I think they were talking about big corporation and investment funds that they were doing, really working on the adaptation fund yeah. So if you my question is whether you went to any of these side events in relation to what the businesses were doing. And my other question is, were there also talks about what we as civil society could actually do in order to, on a national level, but also to do something about reducing our emissions? Yeah, so if there were any talks there about those two things. Thanks.
The investment funds, this was really there are a lot of businesses that have been involved. As a matter of fact, in the European Union, there was a bit of concern that the private companies were doing more than the government was. I see that in order to be sustainable, and the fact that the funds that there is a lot of discussion about Article 6 and loss and damage, and I know that there's the green the Green Climate
Fund, yes, I think.
Right, money is set aside for that. The concern is that it's not getting distributed. It's getting distributed, but it takes a long time. A lot of people that need the funds, and they don't need it. They've even said, a lot of the small organizations and youth, they only need a little bit of funds to be released to them in order for them to be able to make major changes. And there is also an adaptation fund. Some of the share of the proceeds from Article 6 with these trading mechanisms. A share of the proceeds, I think it's 2% would, and they were saying that about 50% of it is committed, and then the other 50% is being dispersed. So it underlies the problem of access to these funds. I think that's going to be a major concern, a major preoccupation that we need to be able to, first of all, increase the funding and to make sure that it's accessible. That's one of and I know that is one of the priorities. But I think that more and more corporations are getting involved and becoming more sustainable. There have been private and even contributions from private companies to the adaptation fund. So, sorry, the other question, whether I attended it, those were from those events that I did attend. As I say, it was also difficult because there were, 4 or 5 events happening concurrently. So, some of them would attend, deal with some issues, and some would deal with a few of the issues. So you had to try to spread yourself around. So it was wonderful seeing Helen there, because she was able to attend some, and then we would get back together and afterwards and compare notes and things like that. So it was wonderful to do that. Sorry, Janet, there was your second question again.
Sorry, it's in relation to what we as civil society can do between COP25 and COP26, obviously, because a lot of, they were talking about a lot of the negotiations actually happened before, long before COP26. So, yeah.
Okay, I know that the plan is, I did see something from the UN Secretary that came out with 10 different recommendations that can be implemented. And I think it was very wise of him to do this, because when the discussion gets stalled or they're in an impasse, they just need sometimes, someone to say, okay, where do we go forward from on this? And one of the great ideas that they had was to have these, they are meetings that are planned, different regions, that will involve local governments and local civil society. So there would be an opportunity there for people to get involved. And to me, it's one of the things that really became underscored was the need for local solutions, natural-based solutions, less reliance on technology. There's less confidence in that, even though it may have the solutions that we need. We're not eliminating them, but there is a fear that it will be controlled by corporations, and then we run into the same problem that the people that can control those things it really has to be locally driven, with the support of your regional government and your federal government eventually, but the best solutions seem to be happening at the local level.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other question there, folks?
I just wanted to make one comment too, that maybe the medical missionary sisters might like to hear about. Attend one on health. And it was very interesting that they said that health professionals and the health establishment is very well respected. They will people and governments will tend to take very at heart what their recommendations are. And their report stated that the mortality rates due to climate change is about 7 million a year. And it's really shocking that it is that high. So if it was an epidemic, they would have attended, they would have put more priority to this. So there's a great number of areas where attention to climate change can be, emissions can be reduced by changes to health, diets, and there's a great cost associated with having to deal with the impacts of climate change from a health perspective. They said it now is a question of investment. It's much better. It's an investment to work on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, because it will cost us so much more if we don't, and and cost us more in terms of human health.
Yes. Thank you very much for that, Angela. And just kind of to finish off, would there be kind of either a word of advice that you would like to give, a group like ours? Because we're always, trying to see what can we do, and trying to learn from others. What can we do in this respect, which will allow us to, I think, play as good a role as possible. And you have that at all levels, from the small groups at local level to what we call provinces to what we call whole organizations. Would you have any bit of advice or any take that you have from what you heard there? Now, I'm not sure about this, but just in case, I think it would be interesting for the likes of us to hear that.
Locally, I think every person has a role to play in terms of what they decide, how they decide to use their energy, and their lifestyle, how their, transportation will be a big issue in the future. Buildings. So, as I say, locally, that will make a great difference. But then, because of the scope of this problem, and it's a global problem, it is going to require things at a global level. So if civil society can get involved in making sure that the people that are governing them are aware of the need for action on climate change, either through your votes or through lobbying, it's very important for them to understand. A lot of people just don't really understand the magnitude of the problem. And everywhere I went, they refused to call it climate change. They called it a climate crisis, a climate catastrophe.
Yes.
Really, and it is hard to, when you say that, people will turn off. They just don't want to hear that because it means they have to change. But it came to, especially when you're dealing with young people, and parents who may shy away from trying to, they may feel that they're frightening their children, but they have to, as long as you provide them with some hope that things can change, and it is possible to change. We do have some time, but we do have to mobilize, and we do have to see things through a climate lens, make our decisions.
Yes, thank you. And we'll just have one last word from Janet, Cynthia, and Francesca. Just what would you like to say from where you are now to all the people who are going to see us? Is there any little words you'd like to say?
I'd just like to say, on behalf of, I guess, the youth, it's very refreshing and very encouraging knowing that we're being heard and that our future is being considered and that we are becoming a part of the conversation. So I want to thank everybody, and please keep it up, because I think it is for us. This is we need to be reminded of that hope, because it is scary. So thank you for instilling that in us, Angela,
Yes.
being a representative.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you, Angela, for sharing your experience at the meeting, because after the meeting, we were hearing a lot of disappointments from the people, but you are very hopeful, and we too hope for the same.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for letting me have that opportunity, and I hope that it's of some use. And I certainly I'm committed to continue working on this, and be happy to work with anybody else who is wanting to work on it as well.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. I also say the same thing, that you've given us hope. It's, you always hear the bad news, but for somebody, hearing from someone who was actually there, to hear that you had hope from what you heard and what you saw, so that gives us hope as well. So thank you. And yes, I hope that we could all work together, because as you said, this is not something that this is a global issue, and it's also something that we all need to do our bit, because otherwise, no, it's our planet. It's only one.
Yes, it's true.
Thank you. And from me as well, Angela, a big thank you. And yes, I'm delighted to hear, that you're interested to keep working on this. I think in that way you can be an inspiration for us as well, and for all the members of our whole network who are interested, and we just see there may be ways of, seeing how we can develop that kind of work together and move along together. Thank you very much. And we'll just say goodbye to everybody now.